Dear participants, dear distinguished guests, thank you for coming today to our Next Generation Europe policy event. Particular welcome to Mr. Antoniou, who is the President of the Institute for Educational Policy, and Mr. Kopsis, who is a Secretary General of the for Primary, Secondary and Special Education at the Ministry of Education in Greece. There is a generation, we might call it the next generation of citizens which has only, their lives have been dominated by crisis, a financial crisis, the climate crisis, the pandemic, a war now in the form of aggression against Ukraine, an energy crisis, and a crisis in the confidence of our institutions and our democratic values. So to operate in that context, especially in the fields of education and health, occasionally becomes an impossible task. In the next couple of hours, we would like to explore some answers to these challenges in the fields of education and health, and looking into a particular innovative methodology that we called the Living Labs, and there will be people who will be talking about that. And also, we would like your contribution as well when there is time for questions and answers, especially coming from teachers and people working in education and health. And this event is organized by three very interesting initiatives in the fields of education and health. These are schools as living labs, the Project Vitalize and Project Loop. And these are EU-funded initiatives in which are trying to explore answers to the challenges that I just mentioned. Two of them are in the looking into the Living Labs methodology, and another one is looking into the skills that are necessary for teachers in order to bring together innovative approaches such as the Living Labs. I would like to call to our first guest, Mr. Alexandros Kopsis, who is, as I said, the Secretary General for Primary, Secondary Education and Special Education at the Ministry of Education. Mr. Kopsis, the floor is yours. Sorry, I made a mistake. Pavlos, would you like to start with Mr. Bamidis for the welcoming? Sorry, there is a welcoming. Give me 1 second, please.
Okay, this is called the Fireside Chat, I've been told. And I have a question for you, Professor Bamidis.
Go ahead.
Professor Bamidis is a pioneer in Living Labs. So I would like to ask, what is really Living Labs? What does it hold for innovation and health, since you're active in this area?
Thank you, Pavlos. This is a question that I usually try to reply in a different way than the definition of the Living Labs, but I would say that Living Labs are laboratories for life. So we want real life to be an experimental space for doing things, and these things could be solutions for healthcare, could be innovative things to resolve societal problems, could be things that promote innovative ideas and turn them to services or turn them to products which may be sustainable. So why they're important? Specifically in healthcare, I think it's we are destined to involve innovation, and innovation that could be sustainable. And I think the Living Lab approach is perplexing this idea of sustainability together with innovation to make it a sustainable process in healthcare. And that's why we are trying to utilize it in recent years as much as we possibly can, and that's why the Vitalize project is all about this, so that we can have better solutions fitting to people and fitting to healthcare, basically. And so that our quality of life can become better at the end of the day. But I have a question for you as well.
Okay, go ahead.
How do you see this approach being applied, like innovation, open innovation, in education per se? What is in it?
Well, we have a very different approach. Your approach is very corporate. You are very much interested about innovation and about sustainability of the solutions, and probably, startups, and all these are very interesting. But what we have in mind, basically, is developing skills in children and teenagers. So our approach, and this is why we're here, is steal your ideas and methodologies and apply them for a good reason, for a good purpose. And that's to develop 21st century skills in students in schools around Europe. The idea there is basically the same. I was just kidding. There's not that much difference between us. So in reality, we also aim at creating innovation, but not for the innovation per se, not for the innovative product or service, but actually for the process that will help our students realize the world around them, develop science literacy, develop all sorts of skills, and acquire knowledge that they need. And this approach basically for us is a methodology which is quite open, and this is what we liked in the methodology of Living Labs. And we felt that it was very, very relevant to another big vision, which is open schooling, open schools. So to open schools to society, we believe the approach of Living Labs, i.e. getting the school community work together with stakeholders, with the local community to solve problems, common problems from their real life, is something really valuable.
I mean, this is amazing because we are just transferring what we are planning to do in the wider context in the society on the new generation. And that's vital because we are trying to sort of have the whole city as a playground, as a living lab for citizens. So we are trying to activate citizen science ideas, etc., and try to see how living labs and specifically for well-being can be approached in that way. But obviously apply new technologies and new things to older adults is more difficult because there is a digital a digital gap there. So, but transferring all these new ideas and the engagement culture to the new generation is paramount importance because these are the citizens of tomorrow. So, what you are doing is on the cutting edge, I would say, of our interests as a society.
And we're being inspired as educational community by your work. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussions we are going to have today.
I'm also looking forward to, and thanks for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kopsis, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, good morning. I would like to first thank the organizers for this excellent initiative that provides vision and perspective for education, private and public organizations in connection with education, innovation, research. A field where also the living lab practice is an integral part of. I would like to say, I wouldn't like to touch upon it because you are already aware of the living labs. Innovation, living lab-based innovation is based on the collaboration between educators, trainers, businessmen, and society, integrating exploration, experimentation, development of innovative ideas, scenarios, and technology ideas and concepts in real-life settings. It is, in essence, an open environment of cooperation between societal actors to promote innovation and creation. This is something that we are already putting to the test in our ministry in terms of volume and numbers of actions. With regard to education, the domain where we're actually engaged, living labs are a research idea that is put into practice, a living workshop, an open innovation setting in real-life conditions, integrating research and innovative projects together with private initiatives. The contemporary school, modern school, is by default a dynamic living lab. Experiential knowledge and teaching transforms educators and learners into subjects of inspirational ideas, and therefore also to citizens of tomorrow, innovative citizens of tomorrow. The Ministry of Education is implementing a series of projects. I mean the introduction of English in preschool, at preschool level, digitalization at schools, that is actually covering the entire school domain, the recruitment of educators, the digitalization of school books, etc. In this direction are also the skills labs. Skills labs are an innovation we're very proud of. During the pilot, we could see that it was excellent in its process, and implementation during this year has resulted in very good output that will be published over the next time. This has been part of the day school syllabus to use methods of analytical learning. Through the labs, pupils become active carriers of knowledge. They learn how to learn, they learn how to set objectives and cultivate their skills. These are actually dynamic labs on issues such as climate change, engineering, health and food issues that combine teaching processes, focusing on educational activities to promote the skills of pupils. And this is the school that we would like to transform our school into. And to a large extent, the school stays as it is, but we do introduce new transformations promoted by teachers and the Ministry of Education as well. This new method of work within the compulsory syllabus promotes interaction with the society, with the community, because this is something that is required nowadays. Community becomes part of our activities. The schools become a cradle of exploration and innovation. And this applies also to the programs, to the 166 new curricula that give a different perspective into the into research knowledge acquisition. We try to tackle memorization in learning. We try to combine theory with practice. Through these curricula, students and pupils come into contact with modern technologies. They learn through new collaborative, cooperative and experiential teaching methods, and they focus on the essence of knowledge. Educators are empowered through a series of education development activities and actions together with the Institute for Educational Policy, so that they can become the supporters and the administrators of a living lab-based education. And this makes the school, this turns school into a living lab in real setting that empowers, that inspires and engages the school community. And by school community we mean pupils, educators, parents, the community, all stakeholders involved in the educational process. At the same time, I'd say that digitalization across all levels in the school creates conditions for innovation, development, and let me just say that day by day we're working at the ministry for setting objectives from the start of our fourth year term, having specific objectives and directions. A comprehensive school that involves and engages all pupils, an inclusive school, an autonomous school that puts in place an autonomous way of working and approach to knowledge within the school community. A school of new didactic approaches, a pupil-based teaching program. Rather than saying it, we walk the talk. A modern school that adopts the achievements of knowledge and technology and integrates them into the teaching and learning setting. Last but not least, I would like to highlight that our school changes. Schools change to connect to the new way of exchange of ideas and to becoming new centers of innovation at the heart of adopting innovative ideas. Within this context, the Ministry of Education is providing its support, and we aspire to promote these new methodologies. We need a comprehensive, integrative, and really target-based, solid approach that will help us change school with new visions, new ideas, new concepts, contemporary thinking, people looking forward and having the power to relieve themselves of the silos of the past. I would like to congratulate you for this project that opens a new window to education that is of the very interest to us, if I may, through these innovative practices and ideas. Thank you very much. Best of success. The Ministry of Education will support you, as well as the government, in terms of these new methodologies that promote education. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Evdokimos Konstantinidis, President of the European Network of Living Labs, but I come from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, from the Lab of Medical Physics and Digital Innovation, where we have the Living Lab in health. So ENOL is an international European Network of Living Labs, in short. ENOL is an international non-profit association promoting user-driven innovation ecosystems. And if we see all the terms of innovation, there is always like creating value for customers, creating value for clients, creating value, user-driven. So this is also what Living Labs do, actually. They are intermediaries bringing together the quadruple helix actors, academia, public, private, and citizens, in order to create value for all of them. So Living Labs focus on co-creation on one hand, so bringing everyone together to co-create, but giving also value to all of them that are involved. So the main characteristics of Living Labs are active user involvement. So we never invite actors in order to test with them. We invite actors to co-create with them, so they are actively involved. It's not just about testing something, it's about experimenting, it's about learning. And here I would like to say that we know the project schools as living labs, but we can also consider living labs as schools, because living labs are about experimenting, learning, and moving on to the next iteration. So it's a continuous process of iterations of learning and doing. Other characteristics are that living labs are not just about a project, they are ecosystems that can support many different projects, bringing in multi-methods but also multidisciplinary approaches. And the actors are of living labs utilizers, those that use the living lab services. There are also the enablers, the panel managers, but are also the researchers that do research on living lab methodologies. And what's the difference between researchers and utilizers? Researchers are those that study the methodologies and the tools, innovation tools that are used in living labs, while utilizers are those that are not interested in the living lab methodologies, but are interested in using, exploiting the living lab methodologies. And this is also what Vitalize does. We are researchers from 19 partners in Vitalize, and we prepare the infrastructures of our living labs in order to make them available to externals. We have also open calls, so if you are interested, you can contact us later to explain you how you can apply to visit a living lab and conduct part of your study there. So this is what Vitalize is. And as the director Anna Panagopoulou said, research infrastructure should not be only for researchers, but we should open them also for the community. And this is what we do, because if you consider, especially in health, but also in education, you cannot consider living labs unless patients are there, students are there. So they're not just infrastructures, but are infrastructures that bring many different actors. And I move on, closing actually, by saying that one of the NOL strategic objectives is to add living labs in the EU agenda. And we have already reached this point. Maria Gabriel, the Commissioner Maria Gabriel, presented the new European Innovation Agenda, where living labs are mentioned as an example in one of the 5 flagships in the enabling innovation through experimentation. And we can see also that living labs are mentioned also in soil calls of the European Commission, but also cancer mission. And we have been invited many times, bringing experts like Panos on the field of health in order to try to support them on how they can draft the next work programs, what living labs is about, what living labs can bring in the research. So as a whole, we have a variety of domains covered by our action-oriented task forces like we have in health, but we have also an action-oriented task force working on living labs and AI and the social impact rural areas. And since innovation can be found everywhere, I wanted to say that, and it's not only about entrepreneurship, I wanted to say that we should not be surprised if we see a living lab in a hospital or in a school in the next years. But we have already a living lab in a hospital. So in the Hippocrates Hospital, Panos Bamidis has already established a living lab in there in order to be part of the daily practice. So we should not, I'm changing my words saying that we should not be surprised if we see a living lab in primary schools in some years, because innovation is about creating value, not just about entrepreneurship. And I'm closing by saying that if you want to learn more, we have our flagship event, the Open Living Lab Days, where more than 400 practitioners and researchers on living labs gather together. And this year is on 21st to 23rd of September in Turin. So we will be happy to see you there. Thank you for your time.
I believe we have Mr. Andeniou. Yes.
We had a problem with our connection.
Can you hear us? Do not worry. Things like this happen in hybrid events.
Yes, I know that. I know that the last 2 years.
We've been there many times. Welcome to this event. The floor is yours. Thank you.
I thank you. I thank you too. Θα ήθελα να εκφράσω τη λύπη μου γιατί περιουσιακά
I would like to tell you that I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person because of other commitments so far.
Ωστόσο θα προσπαθήσω να... Έγινε κάτι εδώ. Ωστόσο θα προσπαθήσω...
Nevertheless, I will try to present the overall context of our Institute's policy, integrating elements that are closely linked to the objectives of the School as Living Labs project.
Ένα λεπτό. Share screening της παρουσίας.
Let me show my screen and the presentation I would like to share with you. I will talk in general about educational policy planning and our Institute's contribution to it, putting the new curricula at the heart of this new policy and describing, outlining, if you'd like, the pillars of the educational policy in Greece today. Imagine that the curricula are at the center of an educational ecosystem. Functional elements of this ecosystem, they go around this very heart, the curricula. The first component, the first pillar is the multi-book. The second is the data bank of exam questions. A third pillar is digital transformation. Fourth pillar is the broad educator and teacher training on the curricula, as well as, and last but not least, the systematic assessment of the educational work, including the assessment of these innovative components I've already mentioned. And Secretary General talked to you about the new curricula. 166 new curricula relating science, technology and maths, the preschool age, arts and culture. 123 have already been prepared in the form of texts in 2021. I would like to say a couple of words about the identity of this curricula. They are based on modern approaches, a collaborative peer learning, the experiential learning, the use of technologies as an interactive tool to diffuse the educational programs in practice, the creation of new learning methods through experiment, through living labs, through the use of original text, through a real life problem-based solving, and of course developing the meta-knowledge, so to speak, that aims at promoting self-esteem, self-confidence and self-assessment. With regard to the features and the traits of the new curricula, the first one is a trend that focuses the interest, the educational interest, from and moves it from the syllabus to the outputs, to the outcomes of learning. As a second element, organization of the content based on thematic areas. Safeguarding the consistency and continuity from grade to grade, the update and reform of content, openness of the curricula is another feature. In order to co-create the content and setting up teacher learning communities. This whole system goes through the process of digital mapping, creating digital learning subjects and educational scenarios, cultivating the skills and literacy in maths, science, and other literacy domains, areas within the educational process. And of course, the operational interface of these curricula to the skills labs and utilizing alternative assessment methods. And this should lead to setting up a comprehensive and integrative information system to support training using the MOOCs tools. You might be already aware of that. I'm mentioning it for those that don't know it. Within the current and the next school year, we are piloting these curricula in 2021, 22 and 23 in all experimental schools, junior and senior high schools. We have introduced 51 education programs. We have already planned and introduced the implementation of 36 hours of training for 35,000 teachers. This will be accomplished within the next years. These 51 training programs will be posted by the end of 2022 in the form of MOOCs available to the entire education community as a teaching pool for all educators. And through the assessment process, we will be able to motivate educators to use these tools in order to train themselves based on the material produced through the Institute of Educational Policy. Our work involves also the preparation of new curricula, of 336 new curricula, and training of more than 15,000 teachers. This initiative shall be completed at the latest at the end of this year or beginning of next year. And the 15,000 teachers are teachers of vocational training and education, as well as apprenticeship teachers. This action involves also the preparation of new textbooks for schools. I would like to touch upon the so-called multi-book. Greece, together with Cyprus and Luxembourg, are the only countries within the EU that continue to use a single book as the source of knowledge dissemination within class. all other EU countries use other systems, multi-book based systems. We have suggested, and the political leadership of the Ministry of Education has accepted the concept of the multi-book. We do believe that within 2024 our schools will be able to select among more than one textbooks, and the way this multi-book project has been designed contributes to the autonomy of the school units, contributes to promoting ownership and professional responsibility of the teachers, who will be themselves responsible to select the books. This multi-book will meet the needs of our schools and pupils, will contribute to knowledge cultivation, and all in all,
δίνουμε την ευχέρεια στους μαθητές, στους εκπαιδευτικούς.
We provide pupils and teachers with the possibility to have access to a broad educational material. And learning is not tied to memorizing paragraphs or text passages. Rather than that, maximizing the use of the educational material is the objective. The teachers will opt in for the book that they believe is good for their class. And in addition, teachers, pupils, the community will have digital access to the books. Namely, they will be able to access the knowledge through more than one books in digital form. Books are accompanied by a wealth of educational material as already designed. If we'd assume that a standard book has 160 pages, well, 80 digital objects will be linked to it, that will be traceable using any electronic device. Another important step that changes the setting in Greece's education is the piloting in 2021 of skills labs. We have contributed as institute to the creation of the educational material. The realization of skills labs has become compulsory in primary, secondary schools. We have created educational and training material to train 75,000 educators, 36 hours of education. This material is open to anyone to access it. Skills labs aim at promoting the 4 CS skills of the 21st century: life skills, mind skills, and science skills. One of the major projects we have been running over the last 2 years is introduction of English in nursery schools. This was piloted in the years 2021-2022 and was rolled out to all nursery schools in 2022. This was a project implemented together with the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and the National University of Athens. The feedback we get from nursery schools is very positive, and positive feedback has been received already by introducing skills labs in primary schools, in junior and senior high schools as well. Another policy dimension we have suggested and implemented is the introduction of the database of exams questions. I'm very pleased to inform you that this very large, complex and highly demanding project has led to the creation of 12,000 exam questions for the first and second grade of the senior high school. We have put in place digital tools to enable the exam questions database to be used across all high schools. The introduction on the first and second grade of the seniors high school has been smooth, and this actually reflects the very good standing of the educational level at high schools. A very sharp criticism has been expressed in terms of the database of question exams that will be a catastrophe, and this has not been the case. This database is a tool to have oversight in terms of achieving educational outcomes in written exams on the first and second grade in senior high school. It also contributes to help the pupils prepare themselves for the exams, and provides creative support in the educational practice. These features have been demonstrated in year one, the current year, of implementation of the database of question exams, and next year it will be introduced for the third grade of the senior high school. Well, I have already touched upon the pillars as the planets, the multi-book, teachers training and professional development, the database of exam questions, and in addition to that, another pillar is assessment of the school units. Based on the law 4692, the Institution of Educational Policy has recommended a plan for internal and external assessment of school units that has been implemented in the current year for all schools. This plan involves an annual planning of school activities, implementation of this planning by the school units, and a final internal assessment as well as an external assessment through the coordinators, education coordinators or education consultants once these are appointed. Assessment involves a well-documented assessment, identifying weaknesses, the putting forward of proposals, and adoption of good practices, as well as decision making. It includes activity mapping, monitoring, adaptation, collection of data, and feedback to the school units. At the very start of this initiative is put the school, the educators who prioritize their objectives. They put up task forces to tackle problems in schools. They put forward action plans, and once implemented, they are assessed, as is the case currently through the educational councils and other stakeholders. I would also like to mention that a decisive factor of the Institute's contribution is taking part in a series of educational projects such as Loop. I think you have an idea, and let me just say that the Loop concept is deeply enshrined in the institution, in the Educational Institute's policies concept. And it is with great pleasure that our executives, our staff, participate in the development of the project. Thank you very much. If a problem with my sound arises, I'd try to resolve it. I think everything is fine now.
Ένα λεπτό.
Of the vision by the Institute of Educational Policy in relation to school education. I would like to invite to the on stage Mr. Francesco Mureddu, and he's a senior director of the Lisbon Council, and he will introduce the roadmap to education, to European policies for living lab-based open schooling. Francesco, the floor is yours.
So, in order to put it full screen, is this one here? It's not right.
Yeah, explain.
Okay. Thank you all. My name is Dr. Francesco Mureddu, and I am Senior Director at the Lisbon Council, which is a think tank based in Brussels. And I'm going to introduce briefly the policy roadmap to European policies for living lab-based open schooling that we are basically producing within the scope of the project SAL. Sorry for my Greek. So, Thafna ine Yarkitis Sophias. So, wonder is the beginning of wisdom, Socrates used to say. In this sense, we would like to instill wonder in our kids, in our pupils. And how do we do that? Basically, the main concept of the SAL projects is to produce and adopt new approaches of learning. SAL, in fact, aims to adopt open schooling in science education, and in particular, SAL proposes to transform schools into living labs. In this regard, SAL brings together school communities, including teachers, students, their families, research institutions, policymakers, science engagement organizations, and other formal and non-formal learning and open innovation initiatives. To this aim, SAL is elaborating a policy roadmap to European policies for living lab-based open schooling. In that regard, the aim of the roadmap is to produce policy recommendations that should be followed in order to normalize the use of living lab methodologies in education. The elaboration of the roadmap encompasses three main steps. So the first one is the identification of policy gaps that hinder the uptake and implementation of living lab-based open schooling. The second one is the elaboration of a set of future policy challenges and implementation that are related to living lab-based open schooling. And finally, the production of a set of practical policy recommendations for policymakers. So basically, the research questions that we would like to answer with the roadmap are what are the major gaps and challenges for introducing living lab-based open schooling? What kind of instruments and incentives are necessary to tackle these challenges? What is the impact that we anticipate for what concerns these challenges in the society? And what are the broad recommendations that policymakers, but also decision makers in general, should follow? So this is the basic methodology for elaborating the roadmap. We're going to start from the results of the project in order to elaborate a set of drivers, barriers, and policy objectives. By matching those policy objectives with the existing policy measures, we are going to see where the gaps are in the policy making, where the gaps are in what policies can do. And finally, we are going to elaborate a set of policy challenges and a set of policy recommendations. Obviously, the work is already ongoing. We have elaborated a set of policy challenges already, and we are going to test those policy challenges in our events in the future, in autumn, in fall, and in spring 2023. But policy challenges, we all know what policy challenges are, like, for instance, disparities in basic science literature, the lack of stakeholder commitment at some level, gender gap, so the fact that females do not choose that much as males careers in STEM. Also, problems are a declining interest in science studies and related careers. We can go on with policy challenges like, for instance, lack of cooperation, lack of interest in families and in some cultures. For example, in Italy, the scientific culture is not that important. Probably humanistic culture is considered to be more important, and humanistic subjects are considered to be, let's say, the kings and princesses of culture. Other problems that we have are digital divide and lack of access in technology, and of course problems in the rural areas. So the fact that the people that live in rural areas basically lack technologies, lack funds, especially for what concerns the school. Final policy challenges are, for instance, physical and legal issues, access to education for children with disabilities, monitoring and enforcing regulations that help children with disability to basically access education. In our work, we also elaborated a first set of policy recommendations, for instance, aligning open schooling with educational strategy, or including educators in the design of education projects and programs, community engagement, incorporation of digital technologies in all the levels of education. Others are, for instance, allowing flexible curricula and school autonomy, prioritizing skill development, engaging parents and caretakers in education, and finally, incentives for school management, because of course school management is the first level, is the first line of implementation of education programs. So this is the roadmap that we are producing at the moment. The roadmap will be produced in the last year, basically will be finalized in the last year of the project. So we're going to release a new version of the roadmap, especially policy challenges and policy recommendation, in a format that can be also commented, and we call everybody to provide feedback and validation. We are going to produce, to carry out another workshop for collecting feedback, most likely in spring 2023. And we are going to disseminate the roadmap online in order to have feedback, validation, and input, and in order to be able to produce a final version of the roadmap in August 2023. Thank you very much, and feel free to contact me at any time, and feel free to ask questions at the moment now, or by email or in writing.
You can take a seat there and we'll ask about some questions. Would you like to take a seat as well for some questions? We'll have a few minutes for a Q&A, so I would like to invite you to ask some questions. We've heard it from the point of view of living labs in education, and we also heard it from the point of view of living labs in health. I have a couple of questions myself, but I would like to offer the floor to you. Okay, my first question to you would be, there is a major interest in the role of patient voice in the context of Living Lab. Does the project Vitalize involves patients who are under treatment into the Living Lab that you have established? Are you looking into that?
Yes, we involve patients because, as I said before, we cannot consider living labs in health if we don't have the patients and the doctors. So for us it's very important to trust the patients, which means that we need to find interventions or methodologies that on one hand they are effective, but on the other hand can be adopted by the patients. So the best intervention that is not adopted by the patients, it's not going to work. So this is the idea. We try to bring them together. So on one hand we have the doctors, the professionals with all the knowledge, but on the other hand we have also the patients with their habits, with their daily activities. So we try to find something that would be effective in the long term. So yes, patients are involved and they have a voice. They are not there just to test interventions that come from the professionals, but also to contribute.
Yeah, the Commission is looking into that area quite vigorously lately. It's mentioned in the missions call. Patient voice is becoming, and I take it that the Living Lab is an existing methodology that allows for this to be facilitated. Thank you for this, Evdokimos. Francesco, I would like to ask you, in relation to, we've heard from Sal on the challenges on sort of working with innovative methodologies. Can you give us, can you talk to us a little bit of about an example of how maybe, in your view, some of these challenges can be addressed in the context of school education, and how the Living Lab comes into that as an opportunity to address it?
Yes, so challenges exist because we want to avoid putting a further burden on the schools, burden that can be financial or that can be from the effort point of view. So we want to avoid that schools basically do not want to take part to this kind of exercises because of a new burden that can be put on them. So what's important is to give autonomy and incentives to the management of the schools and to the teachers. So teachers should have the autonomy to introduce new ways of teaching, to introduce new actors in teaching, and especially to be able to help in designing the education programs. So this is a great incentive for them to be involved, and in order to avoid the challenges that are due to the fact that the resources are very limited.
Thank you. Document in relation to living labs in the medical sector, what are the challenges of convincing people outside the expertise of researchers, and give us a little bit of I'm always interested in how people who are not expertise in an area actually respond when they are in the context of a living lab with expertise, and how they are contributing to this.
Actually, I would like to focus on the challenges that we have in the health domain. When we speak about patients, patients are in hospitals, but patients are also in their homes, patients are outside, so patients move around. So the most challenging thing actually is to build the trust so they can be they can follow you and they are engaged when there is this co-creation. And this means that we cannot enter a patient's home the next day if we don't have a long-term relationship to build the trust. And this is actually what we do, what the ecosystem does. We are in academia, we are a university, but at the same time we have very close to us companies, we have the city, as Panos mentioned before, we have private sector, that each of them trust each other because we are the chain of the trust. And this is the most challenging thing. And even for a startup, let's say, if they want to test or to experiment with a new smartwatch, for instance, if they want to go alone and enter people's homes, patients' homes, in order to ask them to wear it for a couple of days, they would need 1 year of building the trust in order to use it for a couple of days. And this is what Living Labs do, actually. When we say open, we mean that everything is transparent, we mean that everyone can join and actually contribute, but also get the benefit. So in our case, if a startup wants to enter patients' home, they have to come to us, they have to be part of the local ecosystem, the open innovation ecosystem, and then they can easily enter patients' homes. So the biggest challenge is trust. If you build trust, then things are easier, and also to show to the patients, sorry for this, for the additional, that there is a real interest on this. It's about creating value for them, not just to use them in a way that, sorry for the term, but there should be, you know, a real interest to show them that you have a real interest.
Thank you very much. I thought the issue of trust is quite important in education as well. And one more question that I have for Francesco. SAL has produced this very interesting and innovative roadmap. In your view, what do you think that the sort of the decision-making bodies like the governments need to take in order these roadmaps and these ideas to be somehow incorporated into national policies? What is that thing that might be missing into facilitating an implementation of these ideas that are there in the roadmap?
Okay, I think that the first step will be for international institutions to buy the roadmap and to adopt the values and the principles of the roadmap. In that regard, we are working towards the European Commission, of course, and the OECD, so international organizations that will be informed of the roadmap and will be involved also in providing validation and feedback. Once the roadmap has been let's say, bought and adopted at international level, then of course there will be a cascade effect towards, let's say, national governments. And what is important is that the principles and the recommendation of the roadmap are both, and they are feasible. And in that regard, our idea is to involve as much as possible policymakers and decision makers in testing the feasibility of the recommendations, in testing to what extent the recommendations are relevant for the challenges and the problems that they encounter every day.
Thank you very much. I suppose I can confirm, having worked in education for many, many years, that living labs are quite feasible. I've seen them work. I've seen them produce interesting results, especially in contexts that are in need of, or that with challenges that are in need of solutions that involve the educational community as well. There is a question coming from the online audience for Francesco. Is there a landmark document coming in that is sort of making the Living Lab methodology a little bit more easily digestible? That because we have now various results, we have the roadmaps, we have quite a few documents. Is there something coming out of it that is a little bit more easily implemented as instructions for teachers, for example, or for schools?
Well, there are already many documents, especially provided by ANOL, that explain what living labs are and explain best practices and implementations. In the roadmap itself, there will be a section in which the living lab methodology for school will be introduced. And also there are other articles and deliverables by SAL that will introduce the subject. So it's going to be very easily to be understood, and especially for what concerns best practices and application cases.
And also tested by the teachers. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. We'll come back to when we are outside and have the opportunity to discuss some matters further. Thank you. Now, we have a video message to play by Michael Dritsas. He's the head of cabinet at the Minister for Development and Investment. He's talking to us on behalf of the Deputy Minister, Mr. Dimas, and he's giving us a speech, a sort of welcoming speech and a supporting speech for this event.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello. On behalf of the Minister of Development and Investment, Dr. Christos Digmas, I would like to thank the Institute of Education Policy, the Ελληνογερμανική Αγωγή, the European Network of Science Centers and Museums, EXCITE, the Lisbon Council, and the European Network of Living Laboratories, in all, for organizing today's meeting on the next generation, on the Europe of the next generation. And it's very important to have such discussions on the promotion of sustainability and resilience of today's communities, where the citizen has an active role. Over the last years, major steps have been taken to promote innovation from an early age in order to be able to give a set of skills to young people. Living labs play a substantial role in strengthening the innovation and startup entrepreneurship concept. It is a context of collaboration between public and private sector, providing the opportunity to develop innovative ideas. In contrast to the old school labs, the living labs are places that are user-centered and user-based. Those creating the innovative product are the users within open experimentation contexts in real life settings. Over the past 8 years, robotics competitions have taken place for pupils of primary and secondary education, and this provides the opportunity to introduce STEMs to the Greek statutory educational system through WRO ELAS. An important fact is innovation competitions, hackathons, and other competitions that aim at cultivating entrepreneurship and providing skills and capabilities for the young to be integrated to the startup scene of tomorrow. The Ministry of Education has taken steps to keep the training up to date, and therefore we have introduced the Elevate Greece, the startup registry. The main role of this platform is to provide support to new scientists and entrepreneurs to help connect science and research to entrepreneurship, to businesses. It is weird to say that the Greek state didn't know how many startups were operating and were running. This platform has helped us map the innovation ecosystem. 618 startups employing 5,900 employees, 2 out of 3 in the Attica region. in Macedonia and 7% in Crete, 4% in Western Greece. And recently, a law has been introduced to help elevate Greece into a company, a private law person that will give the opportunity to tap into the potential of the startup scene. We have a innovation πολιτεία καινοτομίας, innovation state, so to speak, that will be put in place after competition, and a new technological park, PC Tech, in Thessaloniki, the Science and Technological Park of Epirus in Ioannina, and the Science Park in Patras is being funded by the Resilience and Recovery Fund. Based on the current data, we see the largest percentage increase of expenses for innovation, 1.5% currently of the GDP. 2011, we have been lagging behind, and over the past 10 years we have had a significant increase in entrepreneurship. Greece is innovating, is researching in Western Europe and in the Balkan area, and helps tackle contemporary challenges. I would like to thank the organizers once more for the initiative to link entrepreneurs to the education program in order to be able to provide an answer to the current challenges, which are huge. Thank you very much, and best of success to your works.
I would like to invite on the floor Mr. Apostolos Papalois and Mr. Dimitris Chalkiotis. You'll take the seats, please. Dimitris Chalkiotis is an advisor with the Institute of Educational Policy at the Ministry for Education in Greece. And Apostolos Papalois is the Secretary General of the Network of Accredited Clinical Skills Centers in Europe, the European Union of Medical Specialists. Also with us, we have also two distinguished guests that are connected via online. Michael Teutz, Head of Unit, Schools and Multilingualism at the DG for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture at the European Commission. Have we connected? And we also have with us Rosina Malagrita, Head of the Living Lab for Health in Irsi Kaisa, Coordinator of the Barcelona La Caixa Living Lab. Okay, I would like to start with Mr. Chalkiotis. You need. Sorry.
It's a bit far.
Can we have the presentation by Mr. Chalkiotis? Thank you.
Okay, it works. Καλή σας ημέρα, αγαπητές και αγαπητοί προσκεκλημένοι. Θέλω και εγώ με...
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to congratulate the organizers for this important event. And let me say that Indeed, at least for us, being in the field of education, one key assumption is that today's pupils or students are tomorrow's citizens at the same time. So this is very relevant for the next generation in Europe. So I'm here to present very briefly a major European program which is already in progress. It is being implemented. It started 1 year and a half ago and will be completed in 1 year and a half from now. And its a code name, let's say, is LOOP. And this is a program to address the challenges and opportunities for a new approach in the professional career of educators. So let's have a look at this program. This is the structure of my presentation today concerning the program. A couple of words on the identity of the program, the objectives, the phases of the program, the policy summary 1, because this is according to the specifications of the program set by the European Union. We have to draw some initial conclusions, and then after completion we are going to have the final conclusions of the program. So this summary and recommendations is what we are going to present today, because we also need your opinion. First of all, it is a program funded by Erasmus+. On the left you can see the title of the project in English. And a few technical details. 7 countries are participating, shown here in the parentheses, including Greece, of course, and 13 partners. 6 universities, 3 ministries, including the Ministry for Education and Religions in Greece, and 4 research organizations. From the Greek side, we have the Institute for Educational Policy, the Educational Policy Department, Social and Educational Policy Faculty in Peloponnese University, and ADEC organization, which is active in our country. The key objectives of the program: to facilitate the entry into the profession of young teachers, because it has been concluded, it has been identified, not just in Greece, but in all participating countries, that indeed we need to enhance this, and this can be done by supporting young teachers by mentoring. The program is addressed to 3 target groups: young educators, experienced educators, because those will be the mentors for obvious reasons, and of course the principals, the directors, the managers of schools. And by young teachers, young educators, we mean newly hired, newly appointed teachers, or with just a few years of experience, 5 to 6 years. And they can be either permanent teachers or substitutes. So far, we have taken stock of the opinions, because this program focuses very much on the field of action, on schools themselves. So a short training program has been put in place for mentors, lasting for a few days, for the first time in our country, for experienced teachers, of course. And there is also an induction course for new young teachers. So on the European level, there's going to be a joint common, which is not easy because there are differences, of course, among the educational systems of the participating countries. But this induction course will be based on the mentoring institution. It has been scheduled and it has been prepared. It will take place next September in the pilot schools taking part in LOOP program. This will also be implemented. A few more points. This is the timeline shown here. So far it has been strictly observed, and we will continue doing so. At the end of the program, of course, there's going to be assessment, evaluation of implementation, and conclusions will be drawn. Now, what is the focus of the program? To upgrade the professional career of teachers. Okay, let's say the teacher has been appointed and has been prepared. What is going to happen until the very last day throughout their career? As shown by the research and exchange of views and so on, this can happen by creating opportunities to promote excellence in teaching on all levels. I mean, the teachers need to be rewarded from their work and the fight they give every day as active teachers, but it would be useful to have something in addition. And of course, the state can contribute in improving the quality of the profession or the service, because this is an office, not just a profession. And also the state can and should improve the attractiveness of this profession. According to research, teachers, educators, those of you who have had this experience know very well, what do they need in the first years of their career? This is the summary so far, because the program has not been concluded, for all 7 countries. We need well-structured and well-prepared induction courses on the macro level and the micro level in schools, and there is a major need for programs to guide teachers through mentors. The European Union has assigned this project, this program, because they have found out that this is missing. And what they expect from LOOP program is to formulate proposals. We don't know whether those will be adopted, because education is among horizontal policies of the EU. They cannot oblige member states to adopt anything, but through the so-called recommendations, the EU can help systems adopt some good practices. Now, a few additional points. 39% of teachers wish to withdraw. This is OECD data from 2018, to retire in the next 5 years. Of course, statisticians know what is hidden behind the figure, behind the result. Obviously, a big percentage of those are close to the retirement, the pension age. So that's why there is a high percentage of teachers who wish to withdraw. And young teachers, less than 30 years old, and their ratio is declining. Even in Greece, the figures are alarming. Young teachers are only 10% of the total number of educators in average in all OECD countries. Let's have a look at the summary on at this first stage. First, we need learning procedures put in place by experienced teachers. This is the mentorism, or the mentoring institution. I'm not sure about the Greek term, but mentoring is the English term. Exchange and assimilation of knowledge in the context of teacher collaboration groups. Cooperation is essential. That's why we are here today to present our actions. We need to encourage and urge teachers to love their job, and encourage teachers to continue their work. 3 dimensions: professional career, induction courses, and training courses for mentors. That's all. A few details here. I think I don't have much time. These are the most important points. Those who are in the field of education are well aware of all those points. These are the characteristics of the induction training courses. Support full information, not just on education and learning matters, but also in subjects of management or preparation. Teachers should know, for example, how to apply for anything that is of interest to them. And mentor training programs, which is very important for the Loop program, how you can put in place such mentor training programs, how they can be recognized as important, and who can take part. And to close, I should say that the Greek state, the Greek ministry, has adopted this institution, the mentoring institution. It was not applied in practice, but in my view, the recent law, the political leadership, the current leadership of the ministry has given priority again to this by law 4823 of 2021. So you see, this program is very relevant because it can provide the material for putting this in practice. And even on secondary education, we have the in-school coordinators, as we call them, in the big schools, of course, for mathematics, physics, religion, and so on. They can become mentors, of course, through training and preparation, so that we can also introduce this arrangement, this institution, into our schools. Thank you for your attention. Something very important to add. We need your opinions and your comments, your remarks, your feedback on this subject. They will be seriously considered. Either chat them in, those attending via YouTube, and or on our website, IEP, Institution of Educational Policy. We have a special place for your comments. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I would like now to, we're going to go to Mr. Toitz, I think, just to make sure that we move from in-person to online. Are we good to go? Hello, dear Toitz, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Good morning from Brussels. I hope you can hear me too.
We can hear you fine. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me for this really interesting discussion. It's a real pleasure to listen to the other speakers this morning, because this is very much at the core of also what we are trying to promote in the EU's education strategy. I would really like to start with what Mr. Dimitris Chalkiokis just said in the project, which is about empowering teacher. I would just like to add, maybe it's empowering teachers, but it's actually also about empowering the teaching community, because one of the strengths I see in the Living Lab approach, and something that we've been trying to promote also over years, is to make teachers move away from this idea of being the single person in front of the classroom, sort of lecturing, to rather going to the team approach. We sometimes call this the whole school approach, of teachers working together in a team between different teachers, working with other professionals in other areas like special needs advisors, psychosocial advisors, local youth counselors, reaching out to the local community. And this is something which is so important, which is, I think, embedded in your methodology of the Living Labs, and which is also at the heart of the education strategy that ministers of education have adopted a year ago, and the council has adopted a way decisions they want to work together in education policy in the European Union, to exchange good practices, to make sure that all countries support each other and move ahead together. And there the teachers were given a particular role as one of the big pillars of cooperation. And this is something which is very much corresponds to discussion that we've heard just now in the morning. Maybe one thing I would like to, because you asked me to give a bit of an update on what the EU is doing and why this is relevant to EU work. I think one thing to recall, other speakers have also said it, part of the discussion here is that we have certain learning objectives. We are working together in order to achieve certain things, certain objectives that we think the learners should learn after having been to schools or vocational education, also higher education. And if I look at the discussions we've had in the last years, I must say this came very strongly first in the discussion on what we call the key competences, where over the last years, first of all, there was a movement away from saying, yes, we have what I would consider more the more classic basic skills like literacy, mathematics, science, then maybe digital, where we emphasized more and more also competences like learning to learn and critical thinking. So that was in a way a first step that for some years has been pushed, and in some countries this was not new at all. In some others it was a bit more of a challenge to introduce in curriculum. And this was discussed and renewed 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and we put a much stronger emphasis in saying, yes, okay, for these objectives, but from practice, many teachers have told us, in order to get there, in order to implement these objectives, in order to acquire or help students acquire those competences, and we need to also change our way of teaching and learning. And this is why focus has been moved much more on what type of teaching and learning methodologies should be promoted, what type of assessment methodologies, and very importantly, how can we prepare staff in order to acquire the competences in order to promote this. So this is a bit what we're trying to promote in our peer learning and through the programs. I mean, it was mentioned that the previous project is funded by Erasmus+, not without a reason. This is of the objectives. How can we support teachers to develop as a professional community, as professional, to take on board such new learning objectives. So that's why it is so relevant. I mean, this was the most general first start, I mean, promoting key competences. But if you look at the objectives that the ministers and we from the Commission have proposed to ministers in the recent years, and it always comes back the same thing in terms of cooperation between professionals, reach out to the communities around them, and also support teachers in getting on board and getting acquainted with this new type of competences. If I can cite the recent initiatives, I mean, if we look, we've done some work together on the lessons learned after the COVID pandemic. I mean, blended learning recommendation. We've had a recommendation adopted by the Council in order how can we make sure that what we have learned in this pandemic in terms of positive and also negative experiences can be used also in the future for better quality and inclusive education. Recommendation from the Council on blended learning, pushing a lot for working together in a school, developing cooperation and strategy. Similarly, just a few weeks ago, the Council adopted Council recommendation supporting the green transition and sustainable development. You know, for this Commission, supporting the green and digital transition are big priorities. Again, very, very important. If you want to promote green transitions, it needs to be whole school approaches. Schools have to look what they're doing themselves. The different teachers in different subjects should work together. It's good to also work with outside stakeholders. At least this is what we hear from successful projects. Because of course, I mean, anything I say here, and that's the way we work in the Commission in the EU. I mean, nothing I'm saying here is sort of coming from our own sort of very original idea. The way we work, we look at successful projects in member states and then pick them up and try to transform them. Other two topics I mentioned, digital transition, blended and green. I should also mention that just last week, Commission has also proposed two papers. One is on, we call this Pathways to School Success, which is about how can we make further progress on an old theme, which is about equity in education, equal opportunities. How can we make learning successful also for learners who come from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds? Again, there, based on all the experiences we hear, the issues of schools collaborating, working with local environments are proposed as part of strategies as a fundamental issue. And last but not least, At this, in the last weeks, we are of course very busy also to looking what our country is doing to support refugees coming from fleeing the aggression from Russia from Ukraine, where some countries are very strongly affected. And there again, if you see how often where this works, it is when the local communities are mobilized, when teachers work together. And I think in Greece you have lots of experience in this area, of course. And I think I'm very grateful also to the input that Greece has given to these discussions now, supporting those countries mostly affected by Ukraine. So this is absolutely relevant for the big achieving the big objectives. And I would close by emphasizing again the importance of this empowering teachers and working together teachers. We often get the feedbacks, teachers are overwhelmed, we're asking too much from them. So I think some of them are absolutely brilliant. Some of them tell us, okay, what are you telling me? That's what I'm doing every day. And of course, the objective is just to move these sort of excellent examples that we have in some schools, to make them mainstream, to make a standard practice, because cooperation is not, unfortunately, a standard practice everywhere yet. I can only invite you to follow the examples of Mr. Scheik-Holquist and his colleagues to, if we have any ideas, to apply for Erasmus Plus funding or to collaborate in e-twinning in order to exchange your good ideas with other schools and other education institutions around Europe, so that we move away from these sort of pilot projects to making it mainstream experiences. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you so much for, it was really interesting to listen to the other speakers.
Michael, thank you very much for this. I suppose Michael will stay with us for the Q&A at the end of this of the presentations. I would like to ask Apostolos Papalois to deliver his speech. As I mentioned, Apostolos is the Secretary General of the Network of Accredited Clinical Skill Centers in Europe at the European Union of Medical Specialists.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like again to thank all the organizing committee for the kind invitation and the honor to participate here in this roundtable discussion and scientific event among distinguished guest speakers and panelists. I have a few minutes to have an initial statement concerning education and health and innovation. And of course, talking about innovation in health and education that lays in primary and secondary schooling, and of course in the highest level in our universities. Now, as you can see in this slide, one of my primary affiliations is Secretary General of the Network of Accredited Skill Centers in Europe. This is very important skill centers in Europe for medical doctors and healthcare professionals, which is a section of WEMS. WEMS is the European Union of Medical Specialties, the official scientific body of all medical doctors in Europe and the official speaker in the European Commission and in all bodies of European Union, constituted from 2 million MDs, medical doctors. So, by definition, this organization has in his DNA multidisciplinary and interprofessional approach. And interprofessional approach, collaboration among different professionals, and multidisciplinary approach between different scientists, it's vital for the success of every project. And I would like to congratulate you, of course, because this project here is a fine example of this approach and collaboration. Now, my other affiliation, actually my background lays on biology. I'm a biologist. So definitely, by definition, I like experiments very much. In vivo, ex vivo, in vitro. But as scientists, as you, of course, as scientists, we believe in numbers. Numbers, observations, statistics. So in real life, the last decades in our home is Europe, we have a lot of experiments, a lot of observations, and a lot of real tests. So let's see some of the results of these tests. European Union definitely funds a lot of projects for infrastructure, for development, for promoting collaboration. But one of the main goals, obviously it's the right thing to do, is to ask you, after the completion of this investment, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, gradually to become independent and to find also your own sources of income. Because this is the added value for the future. And we can't ask all the time the taxpayers to complete the budgets that we need for our development. So speaking about education, training, and health, one of the driving forces of our future, and our future actually is the Western prototype. The Western prototype constituted by European Union and Europe in general, United States and Canada. And also Japan follows, but it is in Asia. Prototype, the Western prototype is EU, United States, Canada. This prototype has as source actually Europe. Canadians and Americans are European after all. So we have a huge responsibility in this continent to become the example in the future. And I will give you now just one, because I have just 8 minutes time, just one important to me example of how we can reveal budgets and new money, fresh money as we like to say, for further development of our health systems and education. And this comes from the clinical studies, preclinical studies. I'm biologist, that's why I say that. And clinical studies. Actually, recently, the Prime Minister, in an official ceremony in Zapion, Megaron, spoken about the clinical studies. Now, preclinical level is the level where we start with the idea and the seed. This idea, gradually we are moving to some preclinical studies and tests, and then we are moving into tests in human beings, and after 5, 10 years or so, we are moving into a product, into a brand. Now, the cost of this approach and procedure is for 1 billion to 2 billion euros. Just one project, 1 billion to 2 billions. Now, if you ask me for my country, how many products are under development in preclinical level, it's almost none. If you ask me for countries like Denmark, with 7.5 million population, more than 20. Now, let's suppose that you are the Ministry of of Economics. From 1 billion turnover, from one just project, you have already in your cash 240 million euros from VAT taxation. Now, the cost in order to study a medical doctor in Greece, 6 years of studies, is about 70,000 euros. In the School of Polytechnic, it's about 65,000 euros. Just divide the number that I mentioned before with this number. All the students, this 5 years or 6 years of their studies, everywhere in Greece, this budget covered for one just project. What I'm trying to say, in other words, that here, in front of you, not only Greece, also in Europe, I will say why that. Also in Europe, we have a huge potential of income. The quality and the brand belongs to Europe. And let's see now the paradox. Who runs these studies? They call it CRO companies, clinical research operators, with that turnover annually thousands, billions of dollars. If you see the location now of these companies, the vast majorities of them are in Asia. Where is the paradox now? What rules, guidelines they follow? The Europeans. So in other continents, they follow our own rules. So we have to move all this know-how, work, and development back in our home, in Europe, and of course in Greece. Because out there we have a huge potential to fund our research, our education, and I'm very, very happy to hear all these modifications and radical reforms actually from the Ministry of Education, because this culture and this nootropy starts in primary and secondary schooling, and then in the highest level, of course, at the universities. So, just finishing my statement and this introduction. In Greece, we have definitely by far the human capital to accommodate higher level of education and research. Already you heard about the Thessintech in Thessaloniki. I'm proud to serve as president of the scientific committee in Thessaloniki Special Unit for Biomedical Research and Education, where Professor Bamidis is head of education and head, of course, of the lab. In Athens, also, we have huge investments, also from the pharmaceutical industry, also in Thessaloniki, completed already, many of them, but also the town of innovation, the old Korpi facility, in the Academy of Athens, in Fleming Institute, we have huge investments. So we have here a huge potential to become the driving force, not only from our country, but as Europe, as family, through education and research. Because we are the brand, we are the source of this knowledge, we are the future. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'm here to ask you to answer you any question. Thank you.
I would like to invite the next speaker. She's going to connect online as well. Ms. Rosina Malagrita, head of the Living Lab for Health and coordinator of the Barcelona La Caixa Living Lab.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning. Yes, you can hear me?
Yes,
Are you seeing also the PowerPoint presentation?
We can hear you fine.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me today to this very interesting event. And after this very inspiring talk of the previous speaker, convincing us, very convincing of the need to promote research and innovation at all levels and starting from schools, I'm going to talk about how to do that, how we are doing that from the Living Lab for Health, which is a living lab that we have inside a hospital in Barcelona. And we are running this living lab with a network of schools created by the local government to promote health in the region and also to promote participatory research and all the competencies that we are discussing today here within this European project called Connect. But we are also working in this line with other projects like, for example, this one with the Barcelona Caixa Research Living Lab, which is promoting healthy and sustainable diets. So in all these projects, what we are concerned about is how to put these children to do research and innovation, as the last speaker was suggesting, with methodologies that will help to design research and innovation projects that have more impact than the one we are achieving today. As we all know, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, but we are not seeing the impact we would envisage in some of them. For example, obesity, mental health, and many others, health inequalities, are becoming persistent. And the question is, why are they becoming persistent? Well, most of them are becoming persistent because they are complex. And they are complex because they have many different problems within the challenge we are trying to address. And these different problems are actually interconnected. There are interdependencies between these different problems. And that means that there is a lot of uncertainty. And when there is a lot of uncertainty and so many factors in place, the only way to address these problems is to do it with collaboration. We have been hearing before about the need to see schools collaborating among them. And we need schools, and we have also been hearing in previous sessions the need to collaborate with different stakeholders. This is the only way that we can start to see that these persistent problems may become, may be solved at least with more impact than what we are achieving right now. So we need to train our students to move in this direction. And this means that we need to move from a linear thinking to what is called a system thinking to become aware of this complexity, to become aware of the different factors that are within each of these complex challenges. And we need to also move from thinking that with one research project or with one innovation project, we will solve the problem. It's not that we will solve it with one-off interventions, but we will need integral interventions, meaning interventions that are addressing different factors of these green balls that we saw in the past slide. And we need all these different solutions to be implemented simultaneously and coordinated in schools, within schools, and with the different stakeholders. Therefore, we are talking here about the need to change completely the way we solve our problems and the way we address research and innovation. We need to move, therefore, towards creating what has been said today, ecosystems, networks, and seeing different schools working together with stakeholders, different stakeholders, and working in different missions, and then also meeting together with sophisticated methodologies so that they can integrate knowledge and see these SDGs being solved with a more effective approach. The European Centre for Disease Control, for example, for the challenge of preventing COVID, already said in the guidelines that we need to create community structures. But the question is how? We are saying today that we need to put all these stakeholders to work together, but the question is how do we do that in order to see these persistent challenges improving in the way we are addressing them? And the answer is we need research. We need to put these students to do research, participatory research with them and for them, for complex problem solving. And we need to put them to design integral interventions. And of course, after that, we can move to innovation and monitoring, and we have to do that also with innovative approaches to STEM education in order to make sure that this will happen in schools. Otherwise, it won't happen in schools. To do that, we have developed a methodology. We called it Systems Innovation Dialogue Model that we have developed together with the University of Amsterdam. And in this methodology, I don't have much time today, but we have designed different phases where we can involve students and stakeholders to reflect together about these balls that we saw in that drawing, this complexity, why is it so difficult to solve the challenge we are trying to solve. And in these methodologies, we make sure that we integrate methodologies of system thinking in order to better understand this complexity and better address it. These are 3 projects we are running right now, one on COVID prevention, one on promotion of mental health, and one on healthy and sustainable diets. And with all these projects, we have come up with the identification of missions. With the participation, you can see here numbers like 1,600 students, here 800, and so on. We have identified missions for each of them. Here is an example of the sort of results we get. For example, for the integral model for mental health promotion, we identified key leverage factors that we need to address in schools simultaneously and coordinatedly. We have done a priority setting, and we have identified that the green ones here are the missions that we need to address in schools. And with this approach, we have managed to identify, therefore, the green balls, so the key factors that are creating the uncertainty that we are seeing now, also the leverage factors and the missions, as I said before. And the question now is, okay, how do we move from these missions to define how to intervene in these missions in schools? We don't want to fall into the linear fallacy again, so it's very important that here we run, again, a sophisticated methodology where we engage different schools to develop guidelines together with them to address each of these missions, creating this network together to create these integral interventions guidelines, and then we will be able to pilot them and scale them, always with iterative loops, because it would be not very wise to think that these guidelines will be the solution, because as we know that the problems are complex, the reality is constantly changing, and therefore this requires constant research and innovation. And for this reason, it's why it's very relevant today to talk about the existence of living labs, giving support to schools in the transformation of the health model, but also the education model to address better our complex problems and the SDGs. And now to finish, as a conclusion, we are seeing new models that are being developed, like the one I presented today here, with more systemic approaches, but we believe that more research and innovation is needed to operationalize the international policy standards that are arriving to us, like, for example, the ones on health promoting schools, the open schooling movement or the movement of responsible research and innovation, as here, researchers will also have an opportunity to identify needs in schools and to better respond to them. The second conclusion is that we will need support by international, national, regional, and local policies. And as has been said before in this roundtable, we will need to see how we manage to bring in dedicated resources, both public and private. And this is also that already the ECDC was saying also in the guidelines on COVID prevention, that we will need dedicated support in order to have these living labs to be sustainable in time and to work with networks of schools like the one we have created in our region, but also coordinated with other networks at international level. The challenges are, apart from those ones, effective implementation, how to make sure this will happen in schools, to be able to bring in evidence-based impact on both health promotion and also on education, and to make sure this will become sustainable in time. And to finish, I like this slide by the Systems Innovation Network platform, where it's very well illustrated that we already have very good initiatives, interventions in schools to promote healthy and sustainable diets, to promote mental health, and so on. But the challenge remains in how to coordinate all these initiatives into more integrated approaches and more systemic approaches to become more effective, both for health, but also for education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosina. Please stay with us for a few minutes for questions. Again, if there are any questions coming from the floor, I have some questions coming through the chat. Krisa, please. And also, if the question is addressed to a particular speaker, please mention that. Otherwise, but we can also invite multiple answers.
Okay, my name is Jelena Joksimovic. I come from Serbia, and I'm a national coordinator for some projects there. I was really inspired by the last talk that Rosina gave. Thank you very much for this contentful and amazing overview of your methodology and what your project is all about. I really care if you could elaborate a bit more about how you deal with power dynamics between different groups regarding age, gender, I don't know, majority of population there, because I don't think it's very popular or very often or common to have children being participants in this kind of research, this kind of high-level research. And how do you manage all that different kind of very strict or already existing power positions in society? Anywhere else, I really liked all the speakers and other talks, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Can we go to the next question, or should we go to Rosina for an answer? Okay, let's go to the next question.
Καλησπέρα σας.
Good afternoon. Benos Thekios. I'm the headmaster in 36 Public School of Peristeri. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here. Our school is participating in the pilot for Loop. Some questions for Mrs. Malagrida. Could the Institution for Educational Policy activate the institution of the school that will be very helpful for our cooperation and will allow colleagues to come out from the microcosm of their own school and feel as members of a wider family?
Πολλά από αυτά που αναφέρατε δεν αφορούν μόνο τους νέους εκπαιδευτικούς, δηλαδή αυτούς που έχουν μόνο μέχρι 5 χρόνια. Θα θεωρούσα πολύ χρήσιμα εάν ο διευθυντής, που νομίζω ότι είναι ένας έλεγχος που έχει κάποια προσόντα φυσικά, να τα χρησιμοποιήσει.
Unfortunately, the sound is very poor. We cannot hear the speaker. We apologize.
Και να χρησιμοποιηθούν από συναδέλφους 10 χρόνων, 15. Μια και στα σχολεία μας, όπως γνωρίζετε, δεν έχουμε πια νέους συναδέλφους. Είναι ελάχιστοι. Δηλαδή, στο δικό μου σχολείο, από τους 20 Περισσότερο εξαντλούμαστε στο γραφειοκρατικό κομμάτι που είναι τεράστιο.
It seems that we only deal with bureaucracy, and after 35 years of experience, I think I could help in many sectors. However, I exhaust myself with routine activities which are of minor importance for me as a teacher.
We have more. We'll take all the questions and then we will invite the panel to address. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. So I'm Yair from Israel, and we are participating in the SAL project, which means we try to implement the Living Lab methodology in education in Israel and in Europe. And I was wondering, one of the prominent challenges when it comes to Living Lab is the question of motivation. This is true when you try to implement Living Lab in education. How you get students to actually participate and willingly in such a process, such a long process. And it is also true, in the case of health, for example, with the general public. We were saying that Living Labs are intended to create innovation, and most people, the general public, don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I innovate today? What can I do? Where can I try to make some innovation? So how can we harness the general public, the students, to participate in such processes effectively?
Thank you very much, Yair. Okay, I'm going to, because we have Michael Teutz, he will be leaving in 10 minutes. We have a question for him, so we'll start, I'll ask the question to him, and then we'll invite him to address it. And then we will go to the list of questions that we already have for the panelists. I've taken them down, and then we will try to generate a bit of dialogue. Can I have Michael Teutz on the screen, please? Michael, how are you? I have a question for you. You made continuous reference to the role of the teacher. Occasionally, we also want, from your perspective, how do you see the student in this approach? Because, for example, in the context of the Living Lab, the student is the student as a researcher, for example, or someone who contributes to the research. It's quite an integral part of it. But we would like to hear your view on the role of the student in the classroom and in the learning process, aside from the fact that the student is a learner.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And actually, thank you for it, because everything we do in school and education at the end of the day is for the students. Otherwise we should close down schools. And that's actually one of the issues I sometimes have when looking at schools. I sometimes have the feelings that the schools are done for the adults, for the parents, for the teachers, for whoever, but not really for the students. And we should sometimes remind ourselves that the schools are there to support the students to be prepared for life. And therefore, if we want to help students to be prepared for life and also to learn school, I personally also, and not personally, it's very well known, it is important that they need to enjoy school in order to learn something. So I think this whole idea of involving the school community into the way the schools are organized, we all know that this is really something which will help the learning process, and we will get some new ideas from school students themselves, how to organize the schools, and it will also, of course, increase their motivation. So, you're absolutely right in reminding that, and I think what we are trying to support with our project is ideas to develop the school community with everybody's there, the students, the teachers, and parents, in order to make the learning experience of the students the best, and so that they can acquire all those competences they need to be, which is sort of being open to other thoughts, inquiry, sort of being interested in inquiry, finding out what they want to do, making themselves heard. And I think the best way is to practice it in school and to make it done. I mean, I mentioned breathing in the talk, and very often I've seen wonderful projects where students themselves have first looked at how can we make our own school more prepared for something, a green transition for a future society. That's very motivating, and it's a small start to learn things. So I think it's a very good question. And of course, I mentioned the teachers, because teachers, and we just heard it of a colleague saying, okay, I have to do too much of administration. Of course, I mean, teachers, as the professionals as they are, I mean, they will want to support students in doing that, because of course that's why they have this job.
Thank you very much. Of course, we cannot treat students without the teachers. Thank you, Michael, for this. I would like to go to the first question that we had, which was addressed by the Serbian coordinator of SAL, and it's addressed to Ms. Rosina Malagrita. I think the question was, can I have Rosina? I don't know if you were able to hear the question when it was originally addressed to you. It concerns power dynamics and how your approach addresses them in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of background, and whether you have a particular answer to this through your own innovative approach.
Yes, thank you. I think that the question is very relevant and very, very complex to address. And I think that in every engagement process, there are power dynamics. Sometimes they are very strong, sometimes they are weaker, but they are always there. There are always different driving forces. And it's true that if we want to go one step further and do not train our students with the same difficulties that the research and innovation system is having now, for example, for the European paradigm, we are not able to innovate enough in Europe. Do we want to bring these clinical studies that were said in the previous session to Europe? Of course we do. But is it only that, or do we also want to train them to make sure that when they do that, they also do it with a new approach that is more effective than what we are reaching now? And in order to be more effective, the methodologies we are talking about are key. And regarding the power structures, for example, in the methodology that we have developed, which is based on an already published methodology called dialogue model, it already addresses this issue by first keeping the different stakeholders separate and inviting them to do the research separate and then integrating the results. And that's very relevant because if you put in the same room, for example, patients with the students and researchers, it's very probable that patients and students may feel with this power tension that may put difficulties in the reflection and in the development of the knowledge we need to better address our challenges.
Thank you, Rosina. I also have another question for Rosina, if you can, if she can. Hi. So you mentioned the linear fallacy, and this is something that I have my own view about it. Could you just elaborate it a little bit? What is the linear fallacy according to you, and how it affects classrooms or groups working together?
Yeah, sure. The linear fallacy is thinking that one solution will solve the problem. So thinking, reflecting on a problem, and then directly thinking about a solution from problem to solution. Whereas the new approach sometimes with a linear fallacy, we can use design thinking, for example. We can involve a lot of stakeholders, and we can say we have a problem and bring the students to come up with a solution. And this would be the linear fallacy. For example, let's put an example. To promote obesity, we can have our students thinking that what we need to do in the school is to run educational modules in all the classes, or to do a communication campaign, to families and in the school, right? But if we first analyze the complexity, we may realize that it's not actually that solution that is needed, because the problem of promoting healthy and sustainable diets is complex, and it's not only about food literacy. It's a problem also that has to do with inequalities, has to do with accessibility to healthy and sustainable diets, has to do with the model of governance and the possibility our students have to decide on issues, on menus at home, in the school, in the canteen, and so on, right? So, and also in the food environment when they go out school. So there are many factors that are intervening here for them to move towards more healthy and sustainable diets. And therefore, avoiding the linear fallacy would mean that we first become aware of all these factors and their interdependencies, and then we can define an integral intervention where groups of students will be acting on different leverage factors at the same time collaboratively in the school to be more effective.
Thank you very much, Rosina. The linear fallacy actually undermines, in my view, the education systems quite significantly. If you add the element of the fallacy that progress is also a linear process, that moving from one book to the other, from one year to the other, then you end up in situations that were described earlier on by Mr. Chalkiotis, that you rely on one book as a single solution to the knowledge demand for a particular year or for a particular context, and that, of course, is something that we would like to see changed. We have a few questions. I have a question. Mr. Benos, I think he had a question on whether the approach by the ministry is going to include a process by which schools come together and work together as hubs for innovation, or as supporting each other, or as community building CBD initiatives, and if you are thinking about it, that's addressed to Mr. Chalkiotis.
Yes, this is a very important point, but unfortunately I'm not in the position to answer this question. It's a question about the political leadership of the ministry. We're not going to, I'm not the right person. I don't have the jurisdiction to do that. But it's very, very important notice. Yes, that's true.
In the context of open education, the model is that it was partly described by Mr. Benos, that within the school, I suppose the idea of the mentor within the school is an approach that teachers work together and are engaged in a process that decisions and are taken collaboratively. And the same applies to schools as well, especially schools in particular communities, in remote areas, for example, or schools with interest in particular approaches.
Can I add something? Because I'm also a trainer of teachers. I know very well their problems in the concept of management of schools. No one, they are free to do this cooperation, even without the law. No one can do. They can call other schools to exchange ideas, to make a strategic planning about the area, etc. They can do it even today, but they have so much work to do. So I know. This is the main problem.
Yeah, the problem is that how the system facilitates rather than whether they should do it on their own initiative.
They have a very centralized system. That's why they don't have the mentality yet to do it.
I know, I understand. Thank you very much. I have one question for Mr. Papalois coming to me. You mentioned that probably the potential for generating these funds through research to excel in the area of research and take it to the next level are there, but somehow something is missing. Are these the skills, and if are the skills that needed by even expert people like researchers and people in the medical research field? For example, the example that I can give you is we have found out we understood in the pandemic that skillful researchers and people who are at the highest level of innovation are lacking particular science communication skills their word was quite difficult to convince the community about the vaccines, about the role of science. My question is there something that we're missing in order to take the research ecosystem to the next level?
Thank you for the question. I will not say missing. It's something that has to do with the modification of our organization. Since the same people working abroad succeed in many levels of science, every level actually in science, they can do the same here. It's just a matter of modification of our organization. We don't miss anything. It's a matter of will, actually, and less of anything else. Now, regarding the skills, we have two things here to say. And I'm happy to hear that before we had a question from our friend from Israel. In Thessaloniki, in Thessintech, recently I had a roundtable discussion with Dr. Jovaras. Dr. Jovaras is the head of EKETA, National Center of Research and Development in Thessaloniki, a member of the board of Thessintech. And George mentioned to me that already several Israeli companies, biotech companies, located in Thessintech, they are not under negotiations, they are located there. And they have just one request, the upskilling and reskilling of some staff, okay, for the further development of their business. But upskilling and reskilling for the newest actually skills needed, bioinformatics and things like that. For any other thing you can imagine, they don't miss anything. So the only thing that we really need here in our country is the will to do some reforms, and we started to do reforms in all levels in our organization of our research, an organization of how we put the same papers in the table in different priority, so we have a different reading. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. I have one question for Mr. Chalkiotis. Do you see the role of the mentor as someone who can sort of introduce or take under his wing or her wing the Living Lab approach? Would something be, mentors will be people who will be supporting teachers in gaining more skills, evaluating the needs for particular skills? Do you see a role there for Living Labs? For example, we had the Skills Lab, which was a kind of Living Lab with a contribution from the people acquiring these skills. Just want to, generate a little bit of exchange there.
Yeah, I think this is a very good idea. It was never, we didn't consider this up to now, but this is a good chance to upbring this issue to the cooperation, to the consortium. It's a very good idea, actually, as a method, as a tool.
As a method, as a tool, because in the context of Living Lab, something that usually is the case is a peer-to-peer CPD. So people are coming with ideas, and these ideas are worked, and through that process, skills are actually transferred.
Yeah.
So maybe there is an opportunity for mentors to explore this.
That's a good idea. Can I ask a question to my co-speaker?
Of course, yes. Anyone?
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, that's the.
You talked about the very high turnover, about the investment.
Yes.
But when we talk about investment in economics, we have to know the rate of return. Do you happen to know what is the rate of return in this investment? If there is a rate of return, why there is no investment?
Thank you for the question. The thing is that we don't ask for investment. We ask to bring here in our country projects. The investments is from others. The only thing that we have to do is to accommodate this research in our country. So definitely, without spending a penny, we can have a huge income in our country. That's why it's a huge, actually, opportunity. And through this income to fund primary and secondary education, and of course our universities, and research and development in general.
Okay, we just need to address the final question by Yair, coming from the coordinator of SAL in Israel. I suppose the idea is that we come up with the Living Lab methodology as a way to increase motivation, but then you try to implement it in the real context, and then you need to find ways to motivate the students to go through the Living Lab and eventually get to so any the panel, have you especially Mr. Halkiotis in the education sector, does your approach look into motivating students into through the process of mentoring by teachers, for example? Is student motivation something that you are interested?
I think in an indirect way, the students will be motivated as well, because the teachers will be in a better position to handle all the issues in terms of teaching methods, the material they can use, all these kind of things. So, but the main priority, is the main target is the teachers, that they need the support.
They need the support. Okay.
So they will be more effective in what they're doing, more efficient, so the students will be profited, will be benefit from that.
Thank you. And maybe I could address the same question to Mr. Papalois in the context of young researchers, for them to be motivated, or graduates from science faculties and doctors to go into the research element. And is there a problem there? Are there skills? Is there a context that we need to address for motivation? Because we start from early, we start from schools in order to motivate students, especially girls, where there is an issue there, to take up scientific careers, to take up research careers. And I've been involved in initiatives like this. How that
again, the answer of the question is reorganization of our curricula. An example of what I've spoken before, reorganization of our curricula. And already University of Athens and University of Thessaloniki, they've done this with the addition of new courses in pre-graduate level about motivation, mentorship, and skills. New lessons and new courses. And I will give you also two examples. In the University of Athens, they have a new alliance called CIVIS. CIVIS is a license of the University of Athens with other universities around Europe, and they develop a curricula, actually now in preclinical level, gradually will move also in clinical level, for common lessons and also for motivation, skills, mentorship. They do the same now in Thessaloniki with a reform of their curricula. So we have examples in our country moving forward into the future. And allowed me just a minute more to say that the medical students done a lot of work alone. They have a society, the Student Scientific Society of Medical Students in Greece. And recently I examined the statistics with my board, of course, in Brussels. And as a result, the Greek medical students performed the largest number of skills and modules in comparison with any other school in Europe. By far, it was the largest number. And not only that, also interprofessional training in this module, which is something very, very important. So if you compare now what they have in their hand and what other medical students have in their hand, for example, in Ghent, in Belgium, or in Lille, in France, whole buildings for skills, modules, and all the logistics there. And what they have here, it's a miracle. So the human capital in this country, it's huge. It's huge.
Which is something about motivation.
And unique. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. We would like to wrap it here at this round table. Thank you. You may take your seat at the audience. I would like to invite for our last part Katerina Riviu. Please come to the stage. It's time for some celebration of Teacher innovation, we've been lucky enough, some of us, to work with innovative teachers through the years, and Katerina and Vasilis will help us meet some of these teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefanos. So we are here with Vasilis, my colleague Vasilis. We are representing the Research and Development Department of Ελληνογερμανική Αγωγή. And last but not least, we would like to celebrate the end of the 5 days teacher summer school we had in the context of Food Shift 2030 and SAL projects in Marathon. I guess you heard a lot about SAL and the Living Labs methodology. So I would just briefly mention that Food Shift 2030 has to do about citizen-driven innovations on the topic of sustainable food systems. So during our course, around 30 teachers from many European countries had the opportunity to develop innovative educational projects on the topic of sustainable food systems, following the Living Labs methodology. I think they did a great job. The outcomes are impressive. I invite you all to see the outcomes that are available online on the SAL portal. So thank you all to our wonderful participants. Congratulations. And I would like to invite you here on the stage, and I have the difficult task to pronounce correctly your names, so apologies beforehand. So we have with us Nina Carrier. Okay, next, Ran Piorko. And Amir Cohen. And Hagit Felah. Maggie has already left. And from Spain, Florencia Caralechos and Mariano Perdenera, Alexia Alvarez, and Cristina Jimenez. Okay, and next we have Agata Fogler and Bruno Zaharisevich. From Serbia, we have Tiana Djuricic. Dorina Bukuri. Where is she? Yes. From Romania. And now from Greece, we have Georgios Gidas, Miss Iulia Georgoulia, Mrs. Vasiliki Psaridou, Mr. Aristidis Payouras, Mr. Sotirios Georgiou, Miss Eleni Sarafoglou, and last but not least, Mrs. Andromachi Petkana. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. Sorry for keeping you a little bit more than anticipated. Let's go outside, have a bit of lunch, and maybe continue the conversation. Thank you very much.